Hello, everyone. Aaron Spears here, young adult librarian at the Westlake Porter Public Library. We have a guest today, Matt Harry, best-selling author, filmmaker, teacher, editor. Did I miss anything else?
There's a couple other things in there, but that's good.
The gist of it, yeah.
Yes.
He has a brand new book out that we're going to be talking about too, but first we wanted to mention you have a unique connection to the Westlake area and the library in particular.
I do. I grew up here in Westlake. My family moved around a lot when I was a kid, but we moved here when I was in sixth grade, and then they kind of stayed here for a long time. So I was here in sixth grade all the way through high school, graduated from Westlake High, nice. Demons, yeah. And then I went to Ohio University for undergrad. And this particular library, I loved coming to the library when I was a kid. And so when I was about 14, my parents said, you should think about getting an actual job if you want to make your own money. And so I applied at Porter Library, and I was hired as a library page. And I had a very scary boss named Maxine Pasternak, who was awesome, but also I had to learn the Dewey Decimal System. Yeah. There would be this alarm that would call me up to the information desk, and I'd have to find stuff in the back with the magazine and all things where I had to roll them apart and get crushed. I had to pull microfiche, microfilm, all that stuff. So it was a really great first job to have because I love books. Yeah, yeah. And it's so great now to come back and come to the library.
Absolutely. We're always glad to have you. Been back a few times during your writing career. Let's focus in then. After college, then you fell in love with film, and you headed out west to Hollywood. Yeah,
so I went to Ohio University thinking I was going to be a journalism major. Because growing up in Ohio in the 90s, I didn't know anybody who was a novelist or a movie maker. I love those things, but I was like, I don't know that that's a real job. So I thought I'll be a journalist because I had actually written articles in high school for the Cleveland Plain Dealer.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I got the chance to interview Tom Hanks. I got to go to movie premieres when I was a teenager, so it was really cool. And then I took this film class at Ohio University, and I realized there was a reason for the shots people did. You cut to a close-up for emotion and a wide shot to a stand. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
There's a language here.
Yeah. And you could tell stories visually, not just with words. So I was like, I want to go to film school. So I applied to film schools and I got into USC in Los Angeles, and I moved out there in 1998, and I've been there ever since. I graduated with my MFA in film production. So I wanted to be Quentin Tarantino. Sure. And then graduated and realized I knew everything about making movies and nothing about how to actually get a job. And nobody was going to give me $10 million to make a movie. So I just started trying to find work in the business. And I started working as an assistant editor on the TV show The Bachelor, which was in season 3 at the time, which shows you how long ago that was. And then I ended up doing some editing and did that for about 10, 15 years. But the whole time I was trying to write. And I was mainly focused on screenplays. But then one year, and I remember the date exactly, it was April 2012. I had this idea for a movie called Sorcery for Beginners. And I went into my agent at the time and I pitched him the whole idea. And he's like, I love this idea. Nobody's going to buy it. And I was like, well, why? You just said you loved it. He's like, because nobody's buying spec screenplays, original screenplays.
Oh, as a screenplay though, not, okay.
Because I pitched it to him as a movie. Right. And he's like, it's got to be based on something. It's got to be based on a book, a play, a comic. He's like, but you didn't write a book. You wanted to do a screenplay. So I was driving home all angry. Sure. Well, I'll just write a book then.
There you go.
Had not written a book. I actually wrote a book in 7th grade, but it was terrible. It was 100 pages. Grade, yeah. And so I hadn't written a book. I'd been writing screenplays for 15 years at that point. And so the writing of the book was very time consuming and long. It was oh my God, there's so many words. Yeah. And so that took me quite a few years. I basically finished the book in 2016. Okay. And then I started sending it around, and I was amazed at the difference between you send a screenplay out, everybody's like, yeah, don't send us screenplays. Right. We can't read them. And I sent the book to publishing agents, and they were like, oh, this is great. And I got a couple offers from agents, and then I eventually got a publishing deal. And so that book came out in 2017. And then ironically, I ended up optioning that book and getting hired to write the TV pilot. Nice. Okay. Yeah. So it kind of came full circle. Yeah. Many, many years later. And the show hasn't been made yet. Probably won't ever get made, like everything in Hollywood. But it was really great to kind of be able to to do it and reimagine it as the thing it was originally intended.
Absolutely. Especially in like the world of, I mean, we're in the universe of Harry Potter and everything too. It seems very, not the exact same story, but it's in that, it's still capturing that kind of fantasy and imagination.
Yeah, which I love those kinds of stories.
Right.
Like when I was a kid, my favorite movie was The Goonies.
There you go.
About kids finding a treasure map and finding pirate treasure. And I love magic. I love the Harry Potter series. But I always thought, you know, to me, and I see this a lot with my own kids, is like kids have to figure out stuff themselves nowadays. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting? This is how I got the idea. If like these kids found a spell book, but had no one to help them figure it out. They just had to do it themselves.
Right.
There's no school, there's no teachers. And so that was kind of kids doing it for themselves, was that whole idea.
Yeah. And it worked well enough because then there's a sequel to it, Cryptozoology for Beginners. I kind of wanted to ask you about the formats for those books, because I think it leads into also your new book as well.
Yeah.
I use a book when I do outreach at the local middle school. We use it as our lunchtime book club we have.
That's cool.
Once a month. And we usually use it, you know, around October-ish. It's a good mood setter and everything.
Yeah.
And within the book, though, it's not just your standard chapter book. First of all, it's got these really cool, like kind of tattered edges. It feels like a manuscript. But then in the book, there are also like, here's the instructions for the spells. And we always start off with like, okay, when you read this book, who tried to spell? And, you know, the kids respond to it and they're like, well, of course you had to try a spell. So like, how did the format to it come about for you? Is that something you just had envisioned all along, or?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
That would have been smart.
Sure.
So I had the idea for like a help guide to magic. You know how like they have those for dummies guides?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Like physics for dummies.
Yeah.
Whatever for dummies. I was like, what about magic for dummies?
Yeah.
That was the original concept. And so the idea is in the book, this kid finds a help guide to magic, and it's got all these little things. And then I'd written 3 drafts of the book. And I don't know if it was me or my wife, but somebody suddenly said, well, you're talking about this help guide, but what if the book looked like a help guide? Oh. And I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I now have to read the entire book, and I have to come up with all that stuff.
Sure.
So I had to do a lot more research. We had to figure out how to do the spells and the magic system.
Yeah.
And it's kind of based on like, some of the stuff is based on Tai Chi, like some of the movements.
Oh, the movements. Yeah, yeah. Totally.
And then other stuff is based on runes, the Elder Futhark rune language, which is the oldest kind of written language in kind of like Western culture.
Yeah.
So like actually forming those runes, I thought would look cool as a way to kind of cast a spell, like form the rune for the spell. And then
push it out.
So it was a long process. That's another reason it took 4 years, unfortunately.
And then I just thought of this too. Technically, you're not really the author of those 2 books?
Technically, it's true. So there's Euphemia Whitmore, who is in the book, owns the bookshop that has all those magic books, and it has like the repository for magic. And so she wanted to kind of have the idea for the book. And then I had to kind of, I'm like the front public facing thing. She's very secretive.
Yes.
But yeah, her picture's on the back of the book, and sometimes it gets shelved under her name instead of my name, which I totally understand.
It did here.
So, it is the first one.
Yeah. We'll try to keep the magic alive on the shelves too.
I think I really like stories that have a tactile, immersive sense to them.
Yes.
So I really like the idea of having like a co-author and having your, you know, we're talking about maybe doing a podcast at some point.
Ooh, yeah.
Or she would be on the podcast. So yeah,
that's pretty fun. Then I have to ask, just since you're here too, 3rd book maybe in that series?
I did start working on a 3rd book.
Okay.
I got pulled into another project, so I got about halfway through the first draft, but that one is going to be called Time Travel for Beginners.
Oh, speaking my language.
And yeah, that was really fun to do because I was working on the second one, and I'd had the whole list when I came up with the first book of like what would be really fun topics to do.
Oh, for beginners stuff.
Like for beginners. And so time travel was always one of the big ones on the list, and I wasn't sure how to do it. And then when I was working on the second book, I suddenly realized there is a spell that the kids use that I realized, you know, the spell could be used to also time travel. And once I figured that out, it was like this whole kind of story kind of came to me.
Breaks right open for you. Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully I'll have to get back into that and finish. I'm hoping to finish it next year and then maybe come out in like 2024.
All right. Sounds good. Well, then also leads us into your new book. You are a filmmaker, which even in the subtitle says an interactive novel. Coming to your work previous to meeting you, like the format for how you're telling the story seemed very important to you. And I don't know if that was like maybe your filmmaking background or how that was, but how how did you switch from for beginners guides to like, okay, now I'm going to make an interactive novel?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I think I really like anything that makes a story feel immersive and real and interactive in some way. I actually did a play that was interactive where the audience would like follow this woman around on 3 different dates and help her pick which guy to be with.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. I had a cool experience doing that. And I said, it was the pandemic happened. So obviously we couldn't do the play anymore.
Right.
And I was like, well, how can I do something interactive that like I could just do myself? Mm-hmm. And I remembered choose your own adventure books that I loved when I was a kid. And I was like, could you do one for adults? And I started doing research and I realized there were people doing adult choose your own adventure style novels.
Yeah.
And so I was looking at what was out there. There were a lot of horror-based ones, a lot of like redos. So like there's a choose your own adventure Jane Austen book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's one that takes 2 plays of Shakespeare and turns them into choose your own adventure novels.
Okay. So stuff you're familiar with already is kind of the approach. Yeah.
And so all that had been done, and I was trying to think of a new, like, what could I do in Choose Your Adventure that I haven't seen? And I hit upon this idea of career paths and jobs. Yeah. Because I feel like that's something in the real world, most of us, that's where we make most of our choices. Yeah. You don't get to pick your family, you don't get to pick where you live necessarily, but you do get to pick what am I going to do?
And that's a huge element of life. So
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of drama, there can be a lot of drama in it, a lot of ups and downs. And so I thought, okay, great. What job would I want to do? And I obviously went to filmmaking first because it's the thing I know the best. Sure. I've been doing it for 20 years. It's kind of like my lifelong dream. And so then I started figuring out, all right, what would the pathways be in the filmmaking business? What do I want to see? What would the endings be? And so just started working on it that way. And it actually came together very quickly.
I'm glad you said quickly, because that might be the short answer for my next question, but reading through it, and I haven't got through all 100 plus endings, but there's a split right at the beginning where you either go with your plan to film school or you just head off and start making stuff on your own. I've just been off on your own, following those paths right now. But as I'm flipping through it, I was like, I get when you're writing a book, your first couple books, there's a narrative sequence to it, or there's a narrative trajectory to it. But this one goes in so many threads. I was just picturing you with like the conspiracy wall of sticky notes and strings. How do you organize when there's like 100 plus different outcomes and threads and all these different paths along the way? Yeah, one of the things that really helped me when I first started doing it very early on, I joined a couple of groups about like interactive writing. Yeah. And someone pointed me towards this program called Twine, which is a free program. So it is a conspiracy thing with Twine. Yeah. And it's like literally you can build these little boxes. Yeah. And you can say, all right, now I have 2 choices. And so you have 2 branches that come off the box. Oh, sure. And then you fill in what the box is. And then that was a great way to track it visually. Right. Because I'm very visual. And we actually do have a graphic in the book of every choice you can make in the book. It's like a map of the entire book. All right. Yeah. Which actually the Choose Your Adventure books have started doing. Okay. We got a new one for my son, and on the back of the book, it's got a little map of all the pathways. I do remember those at all when I was a kid. Yeah, no, they didn't have them. So it's cool because you can see like how many choices do you have, how many endings. And so I want to do that for this. So that was really helpful, was using Twine. But then when I started writing it, I realized just to keep it straight in my own head, I would kind of follow one pathway like all the way to the end. Oh, sure. And then I would go back to kind of the most recent choice and be like, okay, now where would this choice go? And then follow that to the end and then kind of work my way back that way. Yeah. The thing that became really tricky was tracking the character arcs in the story because you are the main character, but your character can change over the course of the story. Oh, right. Based on what you do and your jobs and the choices you make. And then there's other characters you encounter that are kind of like recurring characters. Like some you meet just in passing in one pathway, and other ones you end up like becoming best friends with that person. Right. And so I had to track those characters too, to be like, where are they? Where would they be in their career? What would they be like in this point? And so, it became very complicated. So I needed to make an Excel spreadsheet that basically had little overviews of all the pathways. So I could kind of zoom out and look at it. And at the very end, the thing that was trickiest was I then had to randomize it all. So I took the Excel spreadsheet and I kind of put it in random order so that it wouldn't be like this path goes to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. I had to mess it up. Yeah. So that's when I realized, and I had a great copy editor, Caitlin Severini, who went through everything and made sure when I said go to page 5, it actually was the right thing on page 5. Oh, yeah, the formatting alone. Oh my God. And so it was complicated, but the actual writing process took, I would say, about 6 to 8 months. Okay. And then the formatting and the editing and stuff took probably about 6 months as well. It also kind of feels like a writer's dream to a certain extent, because like when you're writing a story, you're like, oh, I could have done this, or you got to do all those permutations.
That was actually really great.
Yeah.
And it was cool because it's like, you know, every time you come out, you feel like you only get to make the one choice, and you hope in a novel like it's the best choice. Right. And this one was like, oh, well, I can just make that character a villain now in this pathway. I could make them, you could marry that person, you could kill that person.
Right.
That literally happens.
Yeah.
So it was really fun. So it was like, you know, kind of the multiverse of madness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know, kind of going through it, which is really fun to do.
Sweet. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us.
Yeah,
and also thank you for the book.
That was great. Yeah, thank you so much, man.